Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I've got Matt, the Storm Wizard, back in the studio with me to talk about the most recent Galactic Civil War event, Ambition's Toll. Ambition's Toll was held on May 6th and 7th of this year, so 2023, at Action Sports Wisconsin in the United States. And if you didn't hear the previous two episodes we've had talking about the Galactic Civil War series, it is a Star Wars-themed live-action role-playing game and airsoft event. And as a bit of a Star Wars geek myself, the world building and the attention to detail, it's just really incredible. It's so cool. You know, Imperials, Rebels, costumes, props, Juggernaut droids, Sabak, you name it. Like, it's all there at these events. And so I'm so glad to have Matt back with me to talk about this, because we actually had so much fun the first time talking about it. And I know that he had a lot of fun at the events, and he's got a lot to say about this one. So Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, I'm always happy to be here, as I have made public knowledge often, is Call Your Hits is the best airsoft podcast that there is. They run consistent and it's always educational. And it's like I have two bros who are, actually like airsoft, or hanging out in my van with me going to work. And it's just the best thing in the morning.
Well, maybe one day I'll actually hang out in your van when I visit California, and we hang out for some airsoft. But yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And it's always, it's such a good time to have you on, man. So let's talk about this event. So, like, I understand, looking back on the last couple episodes that we had, like, there's a story to these events. So, like, what is the overall story for this installment?
Okay, so it's called Ambition's Toll because it's the toll the rebels are paying for their ambition on our first mission out to Bolivar.
Okay.
The rebels soundly trounced the Imperials on Bolivar. And so the story is, the Empire escaped. They took some of the Bolivos with them to experiment on, and retreated to Mouston 3, which is a slightly stronger Imperial presence in the area. Story-wise, we had a few Star Destroyers, and I'm like, well, that's a lot. And then they're like, the lore master's like, no, dude, it'll make sense later. I'm like, cool, right? And this time, they increased the Imperial presence. They offered a greater reward for playing Imperial. They offered more perks for Imperial-style kit.
Mm-hmm.
Like they gave a revive timer, a self-revive, to people wearing a certain amount of armor. And imps, just by their nature, are going to be wearing more armor than rebels, right?
Right.
They offered more credits at the beginning. So this time, instead of a 40-20 rebels to Imperials, it was maybe 15 rebels to like 45-50 Imperials this time. And it was awesome, right? Because they could actually mount patrols and go out, and they had like a little fort, and they mounted patrols, and they went out in squads and tried to find the rebels who were, out doing rebel things. And there were like some woods, and there was a village, and they were really well suited for escaping these Imperial bands. But it got dicey because there were so many more Imperials. They could flank around and pincher in the few rebel guys out there, and they had to really get into it this time rather than just like rolling over the few imps on the planet.
Yeah, gotcha. So just before I get into it, just so I understand, like, I guess two questions. One, how many players are we talking about this time? Like hundreds?
I would, including like the NPCs, there were probably 100, 120 total people there. It wasn't quite as many as at Survivor's Endeavor, but I think the quality of player and costume was much higher here.
Okay. And the follow-up question to that, did you have, or do you know of players who like switched sides? Like, could you have been a rebel the first game and then became an Imperial the second game? Like, is that a reality of this game?
Absolutely. Like, so your perks would still carry over. And if you wanted to, you could have a story reason, right? Like, oh, I'm disenfranchised with the Empire, so I'm leaving to join the rebellion. It makes sense. It happens all the time. That was actually my story, is like, I didn't want to work at the Empire anymore as a member of the Mandalorian clan. So I went and outlawed this game, and I played entirely differently. Actually, I did go after some bounties, and it was really fun. So I personally changed my faction from the Mandalorians to the Outlaws.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, so I know that last time you played a Mandalorian. So did you wear your Mandalorian kit this time and just was an outlaw, or how does that work?
Yeah, so anybody could wear a Mandalorian kit and be on either team if they wanted to. If you were Empire or a Rebel, you'd wear an armband to show your allegiance. Since I was Outlaw, I didn't need to. I just didn't hang out in the covert. I didn't do stuff when they did like, all the Mandalorians are going over here. I'm like, hey guys. Uh,
Yeah.
in story, I got in a fight with another Mandalorian for getting into the covert, and he was like, "What are you even doing in there?" And I'm like, "I'm an old Mandalorian. I had business," and then we butted heads, literally.
Hmm.
It was great, wonderful role playing. But so yeah, I was just a Mandalorian who was out there on my own now, trying to do my own thing, and
Gotcha.
it was a totally different experience.
So what was the day like? Or I guess it was over 2 days, right? There was overnight play as well this time.
Yeah, there was absolutely, and yeah, so we started out day one, very beginning. We didn't have like a starting off like last time where we had the mayor murdered and the whole thing. It was just people were going about their business. The imps went over to their base, the rebels went over to their base, and somebody blew a whistle. I started off in the cantina because I was an outlaw, and that was our respawn, which was totally rad because that's where all the snacks were, that's where all the drinks were, that's where Sabak was, and so like when I went to actually respawn, it wasn't just like we were chilling in the fort, you know, smoking and joking for 5 minutes while we all waited to go back. It was, I'm going to go sit down, drink some secretions, right? But lemonade, or
Yeah.
some, everything they had for sale there, or not for sale in the cantina there, was from the Galaxy's Edge cookbook
Okay, cool.
from the Disneyland Galaxy's Edge, and so it's all in universe stuff. Like we had Mandalorian stew and Rish Kate from Corellia and stuff like that.
So yeah, so you started off in the cantina, the rebels and the Empire starting off at their base. And like what was your first order of business?
Well, breakfast, honestly. At the cantina, they had the option early on to buy meal tokens in game with real world money, so you could actually supply the cantina runner with real supplies who
Hmm.
went out and actually made all these things from the cookbook and brought it to us. And since some of us had bought these tokens, I just went up and threw down my token. I'm like, I'm gonna have a Rish Kate and an omelet, and that'll be my day, right? And that was my
Hmm.
breakfast. And they had lunch, dinner, breakfast, and lunch the next day. It was absolutely wonderful because it helped my immersion so much, right? Because I never
Yeah.
left the field to eat or drink. It was all right there. So I got my breakfast, and I realized that I didn't have anywhere on my outfit to carry it. So I slung my rifle and I went wandering into the village to see what was going on. And I found a market where a dude was selling leather pouches. And it's the coolest thing because I had credits from my last game. And I rolled up there and he's like, this pouch is 800 credits. And I'm like, well, I need somewhere to store my credits anyway. And this pop tart, which is the Rish Cake, was just like a pastry filling.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I'm like, I need somewhere to carry all this stuff. Let me get one of your pouches. And so I handed over 500 credits that I had earned from, doing bounties last game. And I bought an
Yep.
in-universe, totally sick double leather pouch that I put on my belt and I wore for the rest of the game because I kept my credits and my candy in there.
Nice.
And then from there, I was just wandering around, like seeing what was going on. And then I realized there were some Bolovos running by. I'm like, wait a minute, I remember those guys. So I decided to track them down because they're easy credits. Every single one you shoot down, you get a crystal off of them if you manage to get them before bleed out, and then you can
Hmm.
go trade that in for credits. And since I was once again going to the cantina all the time, that is where we turned in our credits. And so or missions. So I would go in there with a few crystals and get credits, and then go out to see what else was going on and what else I wanted to do. So the first half of my day, I spent just ruthlessly hunting these 5 players who were these insurgent Bolovos because it was worth the credits to get started and like have the pool.
Yep.
And then I equipped myself with extra healing abilities and full auto for my second blaster and a few thermal detonators, which were once again EG-67s, which I could buy at the shop for 200 credits.
Hmm.
Really cool. And so I went out just to see what was going on, and like some imps were like, "Hey, we want to hire you to do some stuff," and I'm like, "No, not a chance, buddy." And I wandered off, and they're like, "Yo, you're making a powerful enemy." And I'm like, "I bet I am." Uh, but they
Yeah.
were, since they were such a more powerful presence, they were being like jerks to everyone
Yeah.
because they were the guys. They were running around, swinging around their big Imperial armor and their
Hmm.
blasters, and so I would like roll by the dude at like customs. He's like, "Hey, I don't like those imps." I'm like, "I could do something about that for you." And he's like, "Well, I could give you 500 credits to attack their base." I'm like, "You do 100 credits ahead and we're golden." So I went over there and I just wandered through there a few times, like just so they get used to me being around. And I actually, while I was doing that, I found a rebel saboteur who's like, "Hey, dude, I'll pay you 300 credits to attack this Imperial outpost." I'm like, "Yes, I will do that for your money. Yes."
Hmm.
And I actually ended up finding a bounty on a guy who was in there too. And so I ended up making about 1,200 credits by walking through the Imperial base, throwing a thermal detonator down, blowing up an entire squad, and then just hosing the rest of the base with automatic fire. It was awesome. Mm.
So good.
It was like a Punisher moment where you're just like, ah, and everybody's like, ah, and I'm like, yes, you are all dead now. And then some guy caught me in the back. He shot me like 3 times, which was my kill limit, and I fell down. But I had a medical droid, so after
Hmm.
2 minutes, I got back up and killed all the survivors.
Right,
Uh,
as you do.
yeah, and then everybody who was self-reviving, I was like, pop, 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 pop. And then I wandered back and got all my credits, and I just had such a great time doing that, right? Like, I wasn't held down to my faction. I could go do faction stuff if I wanted to. Like, whenever I came to the cantina, somebody's like, "Hey, you want to do some stuff?" And I could be like, "Meh," or "Yes, I do." There was
Right.
somebody offering something every single time, and it was just it was every like little hiccup that had happened last time was smoothed over and made into a better role playing experience here, and it was phenomenal.
So, I mean, the quality of the role playing aside, it sounds like the quality of the old Plasto Blasto was also pretty good. Like you had some good engagement, some good fights.
Oh, dude, I did. Everybody, like I said, there was a higher quality of costume, but it seemed like there was also a higher caliber of airsofter out there. There weren't any ghillie suits, thank heckin' beans,
Hmm.
but
No
a lot
Wookiee
of really good
suits
costume.
either.
There were 2 Wookiees out there. There was
That's
a
like a ghillie suit, kind
there
of.
was a Trandoshan, and there was Cad Bane, like this character, dude had dressed like him last time, sort of.
Yep.
This time he had he had a mask. He had done the
Wow.
whole armor setup. He was actually a multi-hit juggernaut since he was a face character. Uh,
Hmm.
he had, oh man, it was so cool. He made the gauntlets with a tag-in launcher, uh, all the stuff, right? Oh, dude, the costumes are just so great. There were a bunch of mud troopers out there, which made sense because there was like a forest, and it was kind of like near there, like, where's the field was the fort. It wasn't like super built up. It was just kind of there. It was awesome. And there was
Yeah,
another
I meant to
village.
ask you about this too. What was the terrain like? Because I think it was it's a different location than the first one, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a much flatter, much smaller area overall,
Okay.
but they made it into a lot of stuff. There was still a wooded off area to the side, like you could go off far enough that way and you'd hit the woods. But this time, instead of like a little edge of a rock quarry that the imps were using, there was a fort with guard towers and walls and everything that made the whole thing like a whole different can of fish.
Hmm.
Uh, and the village was a lot larger. It had connexes and everything. Instead of having like a bunch of little villages outlying, it was one big village. Over here's the forest. Over here is the fortress, and beyond that's a little more forest where they might have imperial stuff going on, where you might want to go out and steal their stuff and then sell it back for credits.
Right. And I can't remember as well, like we talked about this last time, like if you like all these people are paying you money to go do all this badass hero stuff and you take their money and then you die, like do you keep that money? Like how does that work?
The money's still yours, right? You still get, if you complete the mission, you can go back and come, after you respawn and be like, hey, we completed the mission. I would
Okay,
like my
yeah.
credits now. If you stop or you die before you can complete the mission, obviously you don't get the credits. Like if I had gone up and like shot one dude and then everybody turned and blew me away, and
Yeah.
then I had to go respawn, I would not have been able to go get him and get my credits. And then they would have been hostile against me the entire rest of the day.
Yeah. And people can't loot you, is that right?
They can for lootable items, like in-game items like a cam tono or the crystals that I was so fond of, can
Right.
be looted off of you. Uh, but they also had a thing where they had different classes this time, and one of them was a smuggler class where you could actually hide your lootables, and that's one of the ones I chose. And so, yeah, those items were still lootable. Like if you killed the chief Bolivo, and got his staff, then you were running across the field with a 500 credit object, and everybody knew you had it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Did anybody remember you from the last game?
Oh yeah, dude. I remembered a lot of them. Like you see these people, and because it was, I don't know, I know it was such an integral event or like such a big core memory now, right?
Hmm.
Like a lot of these people I would recognize faster than I recognize new people at like my local field after 2 or 3 games, right? And I've only seen these people like twice.
Right.
It's like, I remember you from last year. I'm like, oh yeah, we did this thing at this place in that time. He's like, oh, not running that this year. And I'm like, oh no, dude, I brought the whole rifle, and Actually, I didn't end up running my rifle, but that's because I won the raffle and it was awesome.
Hmm. So you got breakfast, you went around, you did a bunch of badass stuff. What was while you were doing this, like what was the story that was going on around you? Like what was the main conflict looking like?
Okay, so the whole reason the Imperials were out there was they were doing some sort of genetic research. It's also
Oh.
why they took the uh, Bolivos onto Mouston
Hmm.
and tried to do all that. And there was a whole story related to that where the rebels were trying to. Well, first they liberated the Bolivos, which was a poor choice for everyone except me. Uh, then they just were trying to sabotage the Imperial research going on against overwhelming Imperial numbers to try to keep bad things from going down. Right.
Right.
Uh, I knew in particular that we were concerned with another gang moving in as the outlaws. Like we were hut backed outlaws, and then the Pikes were coming in. So there were
Okay.
actually some players later on who put on face masks and dressed like the Pikes, and we had a gang war with them. And that's what actually did off the night game. Is each gang was paying off freelancers or trying to hire Mandos or trying to get imps with nothing better to do that night,
Hmm.
or even a rebel or two to come fight for them. And so the premise of the night game was that we as the Hut clans were fighting off the Pikes, and it was like so cool because like then we had different spawn points for them. Like they started coming out of a building that it hadn't been used all day, but we were all passing because it was like equidistant from everywhere. Then
Right.
suddenly there's like this fighting force pouring out of it, and we're like, "Whoa, dude!" And we all had tracers, and there were grenades and flashlights and Mandalorians running around and a Wookiee, and it was like laser beams, and one dude had a sound effect going. So like you run past him, he's like pew pew pew, and you're like ah.
That's awesome. Did you did I know that a lot of night games, especially in the US, like you guys are using night vision and stuff. Was that a thing at this game, or was it just flashlights and that like
I
I
would
guess normal illumination?
just normal illumination, flashlights, tracers. You had to have like a red light to show you're a dead rag because obviously
Okay.
nobody's seen your dead rag during the night.
Yeah.
Uh, and what actually my team ended up doing, or like the guys I went with, is we just took our dead rags and folded them over our flashlights, and that's how we had our red lights.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Uh, but no, I didn't see anybody with night vision. I'm not going to promise there wasn't because I didn't stay
Hmm.
out there all night. I played for a couple hours at night, and then I'm like, all right, I'm going to bed. This armor weighs a ton. Uh, and so we went out, and it was just that there were lightsabers, of course, yeah, things happening,
Yeah.
but nothing very strong story wise happened at that point.
And you mentioned that you were eating on the field because you had access to their like cantina, for lack of a better term, right? Like their food
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot. I guess sleeping at the field was not a thing, though, right? Did you leave for the
Uh,
night and come back the next morning?
we were actually like there was parking right there on the field, and there was camping. Imps could camp in their base, and the rebels did camp in theirs. I know because they still had tents set up when we were doing stuff over there the next day, and they're like, "Hey,
Oh,
be careful!
cool.
Let's step on my sleeping bag." Right.
Yeah.
Uh, where I was staying was about 100 meters away from the field was a parking lot, and me and a bunch of dudes from Texas rented an RV, and they picked me up in Kansas City when I flew in, and we
Hmm.
all stayed in there.
Oh, sweet. Cool. So obviously the night game. I mean, you said you did a couple hours, and then you hit the field again the next morning.
Mhm.
And I guess how was the second day different? Was it more of the same? Like,
The second day, there was actually a lot more open combat across the field. The second day, as you
okay.
see at a lot of events, there were fewer people the second day, but it was mostly fewer people on the Imperial side. So it became a much more two-sided fight the second day. You didn't see as much guerrilla. There was actual fighting in the streets,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, near the end of the first day, a few of the grommets had torn out of my vest, and my armor basically self-destructed, and a few of the plates fell out.
Oh, that's too bad.
So the second day, I just put on a hat and one blaster, like a blaster pistol on my belt, and I went around. And what I did was I followed these firefights around, and whenever a player got hit, I would run up to him and be like, "Hey, do you have anything lootable?" And then they'd be, if they told me yes, I would loot them and kill them because you have to kill them to loot them. If
Fair enough.
not, I would say, "Okay, I'll revive you for 100 credits." And if they said no, I killed them. Uh, and so I spent a lot of time the second day running around grave robbing, is what I would call it. It's
Yep.
like I was running across the battlefield stealing from corpses. And so that was a lot of fun because then the rebels decided they didn't like me out there doing that. They caught me a few times and like they'd be like, "There he is, pop!" And then I was like, "Oh, dead." Uh, so that was a lot of fun. That was a completely separate role playing experience the second day doing that, and that was a lot of fun too.
That's so interesting though, because like, as far as you're aware, like, were there other players doing the exact same thing, or did you just come up with this idea on your own, being like, you know what, this seems like pretty advantageous for me right now, being entrepreneurial in that way?
Well, I was wandering out there without my armor. Like I was just gonna be like, I'm gonna be a guy, all right. I'm just gonna wander around. And then I saw Bolivo get shot, and I'm like, well, he's right there. I'm gonna take his crystal, and I did. And then I saw another guy get shot. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
And so I would be like at one point I was like sprinting across the field, like, do you have any lootables? And they'd be like, no. And I'd be like, dead. And then running on before their buddies would get me.
Oh my god. It's like just it's so funny because I can imagine being like in the game and just being so frustrated by players doing that, but at the same time being like, damn, that's clever. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, like, there was obviously wasn't going to be as much going on the second day. It was only running to like 2 o'clock. So I was like, you know what? Let's have fun with it this time. And
yeah.
the first day there was so much happening the first day, and like we're gonna have to revisit the first day over and over because like I glanced over it, but there's like things happen.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Like, what were the key, like the big things that stick out in your mind about the first day?
Oh, one of the big ones was they had a juggernaut that was a dark trooper.
Okay.
So each side had, or like everybody had the potential to find or hire or become juggernauts depending on how you played the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like particularly Mandalorians could find Beskar around the field and then turn it in and eventually become a juggernaut for 30 or 40 hits or whatever they decided, right?
Right.
So they had this Death Trooper or Dark Trooper who was wandering around, and they had the Director of Imperial Intelligence there guiding him around. But then the rebels attacked. So they took the Director and the Dark Trooper prisoner and took them back to the rebel base, and we had to protect them long enough, or they had to stay there and like hold them long enough to get a shuttle off world. So they're like literally like a rebel dude running around like, hey, you and you and you, I'll give you credits to come help us. And we're like, we're on. And so like me and a bunch of random dudes just from the middle of nowhere went in and defended this rebel base for probably about 15-20 minutes while wave after wave of imps were coming in, just like, because we weren't that far from the imp spawn, just long enough for this like a run back for them, and they'd come back out, and it was like a tower defense thing. And like I had my auto because I had paid for the upgrade. And so, like, I was at the very front because with my self-revive and my 3 hits, I was basically a tank.
Yeah.
And so I'd pop up and just lay waste to one corner. And I fully held down one place while, like, 4 or 5 other dudes were at this other place and 4 or 5 dudes were at this other place. I ended up having one guy back me up, and he, like, which is good timing because I ran out of ammo. He helped me out. But, oh, dude, it was awesome because we had, like, this 10-man front at most, and there was like wave after wave, and they'd come in squads like 6 or 7 dudes at once, and you saw the same dudes, but you get used to that. You play a lot of video games, you see the same faces on the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
And so they would keep coming, and then finally they're like, quick, here comes the shuttle, and somebody threw a smoke grenade, and we all ran over to it, and it's like, oh, he's off the planet, we did it. There was the obvious, when I attacked the Imperial base, that was my own personal Rambo moment. Absolutely phenomenal.
Coming back to the Juggernaut shuttle thing, like what happened as a consequence of that? Like what was the overall objective? So did they get like victory points, or what exactly were they trying to achieve by doing that?
Well,
or was it just being a pain?
Well, what happened was after moving the Director off world, they took control of the Juggernaut and sent him into the Imperial base.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the Dark Trooper just went wandering back in the base and laying into them, and that was the ultimate rebel goal, I guess, was denying the asset to the Empire and then repurposing the asset against the Empire.
Gotcha.
And so the lose scenario for the Empire there is obviously what happened, which is the Juggernaut turned around and was turned against them. Ultimately, though, I do know that the Imperial efforts on Mauston 3 were mostly successful. We hear a lot of good stuff about their research done there into we're not supposed to know, but I'm going to assume the Force and cloning, and I think they're going to tie it into that. shit. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Where's your
Yeah,
next?
no, 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 it's okay. So that happened, and then you were talking. Next thing you were talking about is sort of like your Rambo moment and stuff. What are some of the other key moments from the like? Were there any scripted events as well on the first day?
I'm sure there were scripted things that I didn't realize were scripted. Like maybe it's a
Hmm.
little too convenient. There's a few people around here. Maybe it's a little interesting that hey, there's Chris, the 6 millimeter Mandalorian, the guy who's running this whole event. I wonder what he's doing over there. Oh, something's happening very very close to him.
Right.
That makes sense. Uh, or like if I saw Ben or Matt, who were like the two big dudes on the Rebel side. Uh, Ben Carver, I don't actually know his real name, sorry, but he's the guy who runs TTS Blasterworks. Big kudos to him. He gave me my A280, which I won in the raffle. They were like the two head rebel dudes. So if you saw them sneaking around somewhere, you're like, aha, the rebels are over there. I wonder what the rebels are up to. So you knew something was going down. And
Hmm.
I know that they put a lot of effort into their lore because they have a lore master on the Discord. There's several channels about what your characters were doing, your own personal story, everything, so they can wrap it around their big book of lore, which
Interesting. That's awesome.
absolutely awesome, right? Because they're running like a multi DM continuing universe.
Right. So, and you mentioned like lightsabers and stuff, and I know in the last one we talked about how like there were Jedi's, but they were part of the story, like they weren't players, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
Same
it
deal
was the
here.
same deal here. It's always a safety thing when people are swinging stuff around and there's a chance a mask will get knocked off and there's BBs, right?
Yeah.
So they want to make sure that they are characters who or players who know what they're getting into, aren't just like some random kids swinging around lightsabers, already have decided what they're going to do. And then it's just down to a little bit of player interaction, what actually happens. Uh,
Hmm.
like last time, the Sith or the Inquisitor and his squad were run off of Bolivo. This time they killed the Jedi that they were after, and I saw him shot down like 3 or 4 times in front of me. It was like full on Order 66. Like they surrounded him. They're all like pew pew pew. It was
Oh my
great.
god.
And so like very definitively in story, that Jedi lost. They
Y-
died. The rebels lost victory points or whatever. Like I don't know that there was an actual like win condition like this many points is better or this many points is better so much as it's an ongoing story thing. Like, do I feel like our team did what they should have done? Does it
yeah.
make sense for this? And did we fight our hardest and do our best for our side?
Yeah. Legit. And by the end of the first day, like just off the top of your head, like who was in the better position? Would you say?
Oh, it was imps at the end of the first day. Even with everything we were doing against them, a lot of that was just to keep them from overwhelming the rebels. Like some of the missions, you could tell, like they're like, "Hey, I just need you to go kill a few imps in this area because we need them to back off the rebels."
Hmm.
But they wouldn't say that. They'd say like, "Hey, these rebels are being pressed 500 credits to the first person who gets an imp," and I'd be like, "Ah, off we go."
Yeah.
That never actually happened, but it would be like very similar to that. I would love 500 credits
Gotcha.
running to stuff. Uh, so that was really cool. I didn't hunt any bounties besides Bolivos because just it, I would have had to deal with the Mandalorians and in character I'm having a falling out.
Yeah.
Uh, but I did enjoy hunting them down to the point that I could tell they were getting after me because they put a bounty on me. I
Okay.
had to deal with my own bounty hunters, not actual like clan bounty hunters because they wouldn't put a bounty on another Mandalorian. It was just a thing they wouldn't do.
Hmm.
But I had to deal with Imperials coming after me because the Bolivos offered 1,000 credits for me because of earlier day shenanigans. And
Yeah.
I could tell I was starting to frustrate him because I shot one in the back. I managed to sneak up on him at one point. I'm like, "Brrrap," and he turns around and goes, "Fine, take your reward." And he had a piece of best guard. He's like, "Ah!" He flung it at me. I'm like, "Yes, I win again."
So you mentioned like the Galactic Civil War Discord. Do you sort of engage ahead of time with like for example the Mandalorians? So lore wise you have this falling out with the Mandalorians. So do you talk to them ahead of time to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing? That way on the day of you can sort of coordinate that a little bit or
No, it's more like everybody's like, yeah, they're doing their little stories on the Discord, and you just pick up from that how you would treat this person. Like,
Mhm.
okay, here's Vay, who we know is not hanging out with the Culverts anymore. He didn't have a good time last time. None of us are entirely sure. It's all hearsay and rumor. But here he is coming out of the culvert. How should we react? We should be suspicious. We should engage him. We should see what happens. And so they did, and it was awesome.
And so Do you at the end of the event, like, do you debrief with some of those other players to be like, I know obviously you swap stories and we can talk about that in a second, but like, do you tell them it's like, hey, that was really cool what you did, I'd like more of that next time, or like how do you have some of those conversations?
Well, they sent out an email to everybody to get that information afterwards.
Oh, gotcha.
Uh, Unfortunately, because like I said, the second day there weren't nearly as many players, and the dudes I came in with the RV came in the RV with in particular, we had to leave at a particular time
Hmm.
so that we could get the RV back in time. And also, I was on a work trip and had to get back to Missouri to be at work.
Hmm.
Uh, they dropped me off on their way back through to Texas, and so we didn't actually get to the closing ceremonies and see all that cool stuff. And I really wish I had, because last time we had a lot of fun. They threw out stickers and stuff. I was really glad we were at the opening ceremonies, because I can't say how many times how happy I am about winning the raffle.
Yeah, really.
But right here in my case is now my A280,
That's so cool, man.
right next to my lightsaber,
Yeah.
and it's just such a beautiful piece to the set.
And I mean, what a good way to sort of put a cap, or at least start off an event. And I can't imagine that there's anybody going to this event who's not a Star Wars fan. So like any single person, and to be honest, like I'm really glad that it's you, right? But any single person attending that event, getting that raffle would just, I mean, it would just they would have the same reaction I think you're having, right?
Dude, yeah, it was really great. I love my rifle. Obviously, we talk often, but if I'm wearing extra stuff for story reasons, that even made it better, right? Because suddenly I switched my HPA to my pistol because I brought the adapter, and then my pistol became a real threat. And then I had an AEG, which here's a cool thing about AEGs is then if you're already wearing an air tank, you can HPA something else, right?
Yeah.
Uh, HPA is the coolest thing for regular skirmishes, guys. But so then I had a rifle that I wasn't planning to. I left my rifle behind. I used that one all weekend. It did perfectly well. I think it started out as a SEMA CBR, CQBR, and they DTS Blasterworks does a kit that just bolts on, which was super easy to take apart, which is good because I had to take it back home through the airport. And I only literally had maybe 10 extra pounds going in, like in luggage. And it certainly was longer than my bag. So it broke down really easily, which is good. But yeah, I used it all weekend. They came with a high capacity mag, so I didn't even have to look out of place, right? That meant that sometimes I could even ditch my rifle and move out more easily because in the cantina we weren't even allowed to have weapons. So we had to drop our stuff every time we came by. And since I didn't have a sling, I didn't have to worry about it. It's the only good time not to have a sling, by the way, is when you have to set your rifle down constantly and then leave it there.
Or if you want to, go have a drink at the canteen.
Exactly. Otherwise, you should always use a 2-point sling.
Yeah. Not a 3-point sling?
No, I actually used a 3-point sling in the Army, and I absolutely hated them. They rubbed through my clothing constantly. It was like a constant pressure rain. Terrible.
So why don't we talk a little bit about some of the role playing, specifically the role playing stuff? So what were some of your memorable interactions? I know you mentioned a couple, but what are some of the things that really stick out to you from a role playing standpoint over the course of the event?
Well, I spent actually, like I said, a lot more time in the cantina this time, and I actually played Sabak.
Okay.
And so I sat down across from Chris, and we played Sabak for a while, and he got up and left. But then I had some Imperial officers come down and sit down, and I fleeced them of all their credits.
Nice.
And yeah, I was on a roll playing Sabak. I ran 3 or 4 Imperial officers out of credits, and they're finally just like, oh, we're gone. And then I turned around and bought bacon with my winnings because they had some bacon there. It was 10 credits a piece. And I was like, yes, I have 100 credits. Give me some bacon.
Did you know how to play Sabak before Galactic Civil War?
No, I did not.
That's
and
awesome.
we played the Galactic, the Galaxy's Edge version where they sell it at Disneyland. So they have to simulate a few things because in universe, the cards can randomly change at certain times. And we simulated that with dice and stuff. But it was still far enough from any earthly, normal game that it wasn't, that it was actually immersive as a different game that I was just learning. There's always Pazak, which was played in the Old Republic, but that's just backwards and forwards blackjack. It's not quite as in depth, and this was so. And they had different shaped cards, and we all sat there and anteed up our credits. And seeing the different colored credits in a pile in the middle of the table was also really cool because the credits, and they did a really good job on all their props. this time and last time, and you could tell some of the credit chips had been reused because they were just filthy and dirty and they had grime on them. You're like, yes, this is money. Uh,
Yeah.
like it is, and there was almost to a point where you had to like rub the gold ones to get some of the grime off to be like, oh yeah, it isn't a copper, it's just a dirty gold. Cool.
That's hilarious. And
But
you had like healing droids and stuff too as props, right?
yeah, for 800 credits, you could get a healing droid, which was a self revive after 2 minutes.
Okay.
Uh, so that was one of my main priorities. The first game was to get the healing droid, and since I already owned the healing droid, it automatically carried over to this one. So yes, I had my healing droid, which gave me the 2 minute self revive, and then I had my Mandalorian armor, which had the 3 hits. Uh, and then you could also buy a repeater adapter or modifier for your blaster, so that you were allowed to use full auto, which obviously I did several times actually, because now I have two, so I can use
Yeah.
my auto on my AAP if I decide I want to. Uh, and then you could also upgrade the number of back to vials you had, and you could carry back to vials, and whenever you fell, another player could use your back to vials to revive you. So it made sense for you to buy and carry extra back to vials. So I eventually had 3, so I could get revived 3 times if I was in a firefight, and I could have an ally reach me.
And do all those things sort of reset like once you respawn? Like you come back with 3 back to vials and your droid and all that stuff?
My droid is there. He lives with me. He's my
Okay.
guy. The back to vials, you can refill them anytime you go back to your respawn. They had back to fill stations, which were really just water coolers because it was just water.
Hmm.
And the 3 hits respawned. Now this is sort of an honor rule, right? Which is at the end of combat, right? Which is, and how they described it is when the fighting music in your head stops, is when your 3 hits respawn, right? Like a
I
Halo, you get a
love
shield
that.
shot down, right? And so that was awesome because you didn't have to. Yeah, if I got shot 3 times in a battle, I fell, but I didn't have to spend like if I got hit twice, I didn't have to spend the rest of the time like trying to be quiet, Mando, trying not to lose that last hit.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it made that 3 hits or work a whole ton of lot better. And for me personally, I feel in that at the end of a battle, I could be like, okay, battle's over. I'm going to continue about my way.
That description that you just gave, I love that so much. When the battle music is over in your head, you're done. Like what a great way. And like it's so like anybody who's playing a Star Wars game has played video games before. They know exactly what that means. What man, that's so cool.
Right?
Um yeah, that's just so cool.
It was an excellent turn phrase. Like Chris said that at the beginning. I'm like, yes, dude, that is a perfect way to put it. Like the end of a skirmish. Okay, everybody's either respawning or done with their business. Back to background.
Yeah, that's amazing. One thing I meant to ask you, like, because so you're hitting the field, you're rolling in the cash, you're being scavenger, getting all this money, yada yada, right? Do you find that like are other players doing similar? Not necessarily the cheeky tactics that you had on the second day, but are other players doing the same thing, accumulating a lot of wealth? And does that cause, from your perspective, like a power creep?
Uh, no, actually, there it is. The wealth. There's a limited number of wealth in the or in the economy. There's only, and I'm going to guess here, I think 100,000 or 200,000 credits, right?
Okay.
So there were real like 1%ers, like there was me and Cad Bane and a few other dudes who were like 5,000-6,000 credits deep at the end of the day. And then there were people who were like, I didn't make any credits the whole event, and I was an Imperial trooper, and I'm like, bro, it's kind of in how you role play. And they're like, all I did was guard the base all day, and I didn't make any credits. And I'm like, bro, all you did was guard the base all day.
Yeah.
Private Joe Snuffy doesn't get paid like Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Right. So, is there, like when we talked about this before, like you were very entrepreneurial about it. Like, are there players who are out there encouraging other players to get into the role play as well, to just boost their own experience? Like, did you see that as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, like everybody was in character from minute one. Like the interactions that broke character were very few and far between. And if somebody was like lost, not quite knowing what was going on, you would see somebody near and be like, "Hey, minute, hey, you want some work?" Or they'd be like, "Hey, we're going off to do this job. Did you want to come with us?"
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of looking out for people who weren't quite entirely sure what they were doing there, and there were a few, and you could tell like they were just like in the middle of the village, like, "Wow, what's going on here? What should I even do?" And so you'd see like a guys like, "Hey, we're gonna go shoot up this imp outpost and then go hang out with the Wookiees. You want to go?" They're like, "Yeah, okay, cool." And then so that way they'd end up back in the cantina with the Wookiees hanging out, and then they get another mission from there, and from that sort of kickstarted any single person's role playing experience. So yeah, like the NPCs were out there looking out for it, and there were events throughout the day, throughout the whole the weekend. There were big like NPC events. Like the gang fight wasn't the only one. There was also one where it's like everybody come and try out to show off your strength and skills to marry the beautiful alien cat, and it was this girl in makeup, and so we went out there and everybody did push-ups. Well, I saw it all from a distance because I was doing my own mission at the time, but like I
Yeah.
saw everybody out in the field doing push-ups, and then there was a wedding, and then the Pikes sabotaged the wedding, and somebody threw a thermal detonator and killed everyone. Uh, it was a whole thing, right? And you actually saw like afterwards, you saw like this whole. I saw from like maybe 100 meters away, 200 meters. I couldn't even interact. I was just watching all these people do push-ups and then like what looked like a wedding, and then the detonator went off, and then everybody falls down. There's two dudes just booking it away at like full sprint, like looking behind them, like and I'm like, oh, those guys must have just blown up the wedding. And sure enough, about 5 minutes later, there's a gang of Mandos popped up from the wedding, and they're all chasing after these two dudes. I'm like, oh, they did blow up the wedding. Okay.
Yeah, the very own Red Wedding of the Galactic Civil War series. That's so
Exactly.
funny.
Yeah, there was a lot of really neat uh, organized crime stuff like that going on, like just sabotages, extortion as the Pikes came in. A little bit of Book of Boba Fett rolling through. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, never a dull moment by the sounds of it.
Oh no, man! It was like I said. They ironed out everything from last time. There wasn't the same force disparity. There wasn't the same like. There were places where you were getting locked up last time. Nobody could do anything just because of how bad the terrain was at certain points, or like how something had been set up. But this time they had a way to break every lock, every stalemate that popped up. Suddenly there'd be an admin gently and characterly steering things around.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, they didn't have everything they had planned, which I have on good authority, having it from Chewbacca, uh, because Han Solo had apparently like another third or half of role playing things to do beyond, and he didn't make it out. Uh,
Ah,
so we actually like only got maybe 2/3 of what they had planned, and there was still everything. Like every time I came back to the cantina, there was one guy who was out gathering data pads, which were just like picture frames or like a shadow box with information in it, with like letters leading to a treasure. And like every time I came back, he had another one of these data pads, and eventually he had 8 or 9 of them. And he's like, okay. And he had a map next to him. He's like, these all lead to coordinates. And eventually he went out in the woods and he found the ion blaster, which was this huge Barrett thing all done up. And by turning it into the blaster shop who had lost it, he got 2,000 credits just like off the bat. Or he could have used it for the rest of the game to kill juggernauts in one hit.
wow.
So that was
so,
really.
so
Sorry.
Chewbacca was a character at this event. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, he's actually one of the dudes who rode up in the RV with me.
Oh my god.
Uh, yeah, dude, he wore the whole suit. He usually didn't have the mask on because honestly, it's a little bit warm and the mask gets bad. Whenever we did story stuff, he had the mask on. Like
Yeah.
when we were all getting up to go for our for like our big group outlaw shootout with the Pikes, he had his mask on. But like 10 minutes into the fight, nixed it. Uh,
Yeah.
which I fully understand. Every single time I was down, I took that opportunity. Like,
Yeah, I can only imagine. Like how hot was it down there in Wisconsin?
it wasn't terrible. We were like in 80 Fahrenheit. Sorry, I didn't convert beforehand.
That's okay. That's like high like 20s or so. Yeah.
So it was warm enough that like once you got active, you were sweating, but cool enough that if you sat around for a while, you were pretty comfortable. And the evening got a bit cooler, and I noticed it as like I was sitting playing Sabaka. Suddenly a breeze rolled across and hit all the sweat that had built up on my suit through the day. I'm like, no. Uh,
Yeah, I'm a little chilly. Yeah.
uh, but it was a really comfortable evening and day.
Awesome. And how did the second day sort of culminate for you? Like what was the end result of that day? Like you mentioned sort of like the scavenging and stuff like that. What was the big thing for you that day?
Well, once I had everything together and I had my lunch, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to spend some of my credits. So I visited each vendor to make sure that I'd be set up as well as possible for the next event, right? So I stopped and I bought another back to vial upgrade, and I did another thermal detonator upgrade. So I can now carry 4 thermal detonators beyond the original load, whatever you can, which in my class is 5. So I can carry up to 9 thermal detonators if I want to, which sounds obscene, but I have the money, the credits to afford it. Uh,
Hmm.
and then I've got 2 extra back to vials, so I've got more revives if somebody comes across me. And then I bought a bunch of leather goods from the leather goods shop. Because how cool is that I was using in-universe money to buy leather goods to fit on my belt to be better in-universe? I bought several things. I bought a medic pouch. I bought the cool double pouch that I carried all my stuff in that I told you about the first time. I bought a pouch that was specifically made for holding the back to vials. Phenomenal.
So, just out of curiosity, like, what is the equivalency for the credits to like dollars, right? Because obviously, like, you're buying a leather good, but that has a real dollar value, right?
Uh, well, they seemed pricey, but then I think about it, since you actually say what is the equivalency, now that I think about it, it isn't that far off from like 10 to 1. Like I bought these double pouches for 800. Yeah, that one was 800. That one was 800 credits. The medic pouch was 500. And if I had gone to a high quality leather worker in the real world and said, "Hey, I want these pouches customized to fit my Star Wars kit," they would say $80 ish. I would not have been thrown off at all. Like to
Yeah.
pay $80 for an item of that quality.
Okay,
And
well, that's
also,
good.
like the blasters were going for about 2,000 to 2,500 credits this time, but like you look at the one that's made out of the Hater, and I forget what the in-universe game the name was, and that was 2,000 credits. And in the real world, that's $100 kit on an $80 blaster. It makes sense. It actually rolls out perfectly that way. Uh,
And you can't like buy credits, right?
no, you cannot buy credits with money. You have to earn credits somehow. You have to, loot. You have to fight for them. You can steal them. No, you can't steal. You cannot steal credits in universe. That'll get you kicked out of Galactic Civil War. Don't do it. No, you beg, borrow, fight, go out and do
Fleece them
work.
out during
Fleece
Sabak.
them. Sabak, yeah. Teach people how to play Sabak and take their credits as you go.
Yeah, yeah. That's so funny.
And then,
So, yeah, go ahead.
well, it was also really cool because that's where one of my game missions came from. Is I had a high-ranking Imperial officer who came to play Sabak with me since I had run out a few of the lower guys and they were all out of credits. And he's like, I have deeper pockets. And we actually played for a while. And then we eventually went up the stakes, and it was like, I hear you have these data pads and I want to look at them. And I'm like, you can look at them if you add 300 credits to the pot and you win. And so we actually like went back and forth on like this espionage game within. We're like, it's worthless to me, but clearly it's something to this guy. And so that was a really cool element in there also.
That's so cool, man. And I can only imagine, like, because you're all there for the same experience, and I think you mentioned this earlier, actually, but people aren't really breaking the immersion because they're looking for that, right? So you're probably not doing too much out of universe chit chat in the cantina, Like, is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Like everybody was in character, even, and they had made it a safe zone in the cantina. Like you could go and take off your goggles, your eye pro. They had done sheets with plywood and everything. It was this whole safe zone that they made out in the middle of this place. Totally props to them for building it, because it was like they all went out the night before and put this thing together. But no, everybody was still in character in there. So like I'd go in and I'd take off my helmet and I'd look around and everybody would make eye contact and we'd give each other the stink eye, like, there's Cat Bane. And he'd be like, oh, I remember you from Boulevard. And I'm like, up yours, Bane. But then he's like, yeah, I know. You want to go on a mission? I'm like, yeah, for credits. Which is a lot of fun because, like, in the parking lot, that guy's a total bro, right?
Yeah.
We're like sitting there like, mean mugging you. You mean mugging me? I can tell.
Yeah, and I guess since you know that he's a bro, it's easier to mean mug and stuff because nobody's taking it personally. I guess like taking it seriously, but not taking it personally. I guess is the
exactly yeah. Like we are all buying into the same fantasy at this point. Like we are there for it, bro. When dude comes in, he's like, "Why were you in the culvert?" I'm like, "Yes, you should be questioning me. Let's fight."
And then headbutt, like you said, quite literally.
Yeah, like crack right in your helmet. Like, don't mess with me. And I had my helmet off at the time because otherwise, I promise I would not do that to another dude's costume. Just crack a
legit.
It, right? But he was there, and I'm like, you know what? It's plastic. Pop. And that's a thing a Mandalorian would do, and I really enjoyed that. And then later on, like I saw him in the parking lot, and he's like, "Man, I'm glad you weren't wearing your helmet." I'm like, "I bet you are."
Here's a random question just popped into my head. Is there anything that is used during those games to denote stuff that is out of play or out of universe or out of character?
Yeah, it isn't yellow tape like some geniuses use when they're putting together their milsim events. I heard about that recently. Which brilliant idea, by the way. I love that. I'm going to use it when I try to put together the event that I'm thinking about putting together of mine. Uh, but no, they would put on a reflective vest, and that showed that they were out of the game and doing admin things, or a photographer, or like just somebody that is like, oh, maybe if I have an emergency, I'll talk to that dude, but otherwise, I shouldn't really deal with him right now. Like I saw Chris wearing the vest. I'm like, hey, Chris. Psh, out of game question real quick. Uh,
Yeah, gotcha.
but if I was going to do character things, I would have pretended he wasn't there.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, and I was just curious about that because the yellow tape idea that actually came from talking to larpers here locally, and that's what they use to denote like their actors and stuff like that, because they use like puppeteers sometimes, and they don't want people to interact with the puppeteer, just the puppet. So the puppeteer wears like a yellow headband or a yellow armband. So I sort of pilfer that, but I wondered if that they might do something like that. But yellow vest or like a reflective vest or safety vest or whatever makes total sense too. So last lot of question for you here, like what's next for you? Like what's the next event that's coming up, and have they announced it? What does that look like?
Okay, so the next one, they've actually decided based on the way this went and the success of it that they're going to run a separate mini in-game series called the Battlefront series,
Okay.
which is taking place back at the Rock, but they're only going to be using the village, and it's basically going to be a Star Wars themed skirmish with role-playing events during the downtime. So like everybody will go back to the resting area, the cantina, as it will, and then from there they'll go out to their separate sides and then fight and capture the flag and traditional skirmish airsoft games. And
Gotcha.
there's only going to be two sides for that, and you can come out as your character if you want to and play for one side or the other, but it's going to be primarily Battlefront.
Okay. And then have they announced like their next sort of main attraction?
No, not yet. Which I'm hoping it'll be next year because as exciting as it is, because the Battlefront one's in November, and I'm like, I don't
Okay.
think that I can swing another flight out this year to play airsoft. Right? I got
Right,
really
yeah.
lucky in that my company wanted to do it, but it's hard to look at my budget and be like, I don't know, man. Do I want to take my daughter to swim classes or do I want to go play airsoft with a bunch of nerds? And as much as I love Star Wars, she's going to win out that equation every time.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. And I mean, for sure, we've talked about this on some of the other episodes in the past, like traveling to play all these airsoft events, like it sounds great in theory, but like unlike your high ranking Imperial, we don't all have deep pockets to be able to do that, right? And we've talked about me going to Iron Horse with John, next year. Like that is the kind of trip that is expensive enough that we are going to do it once, and we may not do it again for many years or perhaps even ever, right? Because of the expense that that represents. So for you guys, it's cheaper than, of course, flying off Newfoundland because whatever. But it's still an expense that I can't imagine. If they were to do 2 or 3 Star Wars events per year, like you probably wouldn't. Most people probably, I would say, wouldn't be like flying out for all of them, right? Unless you happen to live in the area.
No, and that's actually something, I hope eventually that they do more in different areas because if they have like their idea now is that it's in the center of the continental US. So everybody's equidistant. And I'm like, but bro, it really doesn't cost me that much more to fly to Florida from California as it does to fly to Wisconsin or Missouri.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those guys are based around Wisconsin and Missouri, which interestingly enough is why they're having them at places out there, believe it or not. Uh, but they are looking for future prospective locations. I do know that, and they talk about it a lot on the Discord. And it'd be really nice if they had like maybe a West Coast and an East Coast series because it would be nice to get to more games. And it starts an itch in you when you go to these bigger events where you want more. You don't want to go back to your skirmishes. You don't want to go back to your milsim adjacent. You don't want to go back to your local every weekend again. You want events, you want things, you want differences. Uh, Battle for LA was awesome because it was an entirely different experience. Like Galactic Civil War, each time was an entirely different experience and it changed the way I airsoft, the way I play at my locals, the way I skirmish, the way I interact though, and also the way that I'm looking at airsoft in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was sure forever that I was just going to play a rifleman because that's what conquers at CQB City is a mid-range M4 style rifle. And some people go shorter, nobody goes longer because I can reach all the way across. Uh, But after playing other games, I considered using machine guns. I considered subguns. I considered I want a longer range weapon. I want differences because of this, and it's opened up a whole new like desire that I didn't realize was there just by
Yeah.
having the chance to go out and do these things these couple of times. So once again, as I always do, I encourage you guys to seek out new airsoft experiences and try, even if you get to fly out once in your lifetime, make it a thing, right? Like talk to your buddies, make some friends, go out together, experience these different airsoft things, and chase the way you wanted to play airsoft as a kid, the way the inner you wants to come out and play war,
Yeah.
right?
And I can't echo you even more on that. It's so fundamental. Like, you guys, and the podcast, the Discord, like all that has opened my eyes to what airsoft actually looks like, and it's way bigger and way different. Like what we do on our local field or whatever. Like you're talking what conquers at CQB City. I know what conquers at Frontline. I don't know what conquers anywhere else. And it turns out that maybe some of those things I actually enjoy more than what I'm doing, on the weekly. So, but if I don't experience those things ever, I'm never going to know that. And similarly for people like you who are attending like the airsoft plus the LARP aspect of it in a universe that you happen to, super enjoy. Well, this you're like once you've experienced that, like you don't forget it, right?
Right. Like,
I totally hear what you're saying about it being hard to go back to the normal once you've done something so extraordinary.
uh, absolutely, dude. Like, because we always think we know what's going on in airsoft or we know what's going on in our hobby, but then we have to step back and realize that it isn't. Like, we are a tiny corner of whatever, even the nichest hobby like airsoft. Because the first however long I was listening to you guys, I didn't understand half of what you were saying. You're like this and this and this, and when we sneak around here, there's no sneaking in airsoft. Why are you wearing camouflage, you doodads? And
Yeah.
then but then I listened to other guys. Like I listened to BBs Don't Hurt, right? And those guys are like, you're never gonna need this for airsoft. I'm like, bro, I wear that every day at air. Oh, they play differently than me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it took a long time longer than I'm proud to admit that to realize that it wasn't just my local skirmish and Milsim West, right? That there's a whole spectrum, and man, airsoft is out there for you.
Yeah. Well, and when I talked to, Rob from Gunfather Milsim, he introduced me to the expression that airsoft is a big tent. And, since that time, I've really come to absorb that and realize that like airsoft is so different for everybody, whether it's you playing CQB City or you playing Star Wars LARP, or whether it's what, Ben experiences when he's playing airsoft from Australia going to New Zealand, or what Ambo experiences playing airsoft at Border War. Like it's all different. It's all similar. It's all plasto blasto, but it's all super unique.
Right? And
And it's amazing. It really is.
it is it's so cool as a worldwide thing, right? Like that we're talking to these dudes from Australia, from Germany, from the UK, from Belgium, and now these are places where I'm looking at my girl. I'm like, hey, you want to take a trip there a year, maybe 2 years down the road, and then I'm like, hey, Ambo, you got a spare kit? You got a spare kit for me out
Yeah,
there?
exactly. Yeah, totally, right?
And
And
she's like,
and
oh, I've
you
always wanted to see Ramstein. I'm like, I bet you do. I've always wanted to see this field over here. Let's go check it out.
yeah, and it's yeah, it's incredible. Like, and I've said it before, but like the only reason that we're even aware, number one, of Iron Horse and even considering coming is because we know that when we go down there, we're gonna have a crew of people who are like chill, who we've known and talked to for a long while. Like, to be honest with you, like I'm absolutely looking forward to Iron Horse as an event and stuff. But even more so than that, it's meeting you guys, right?
Right? Like
And
I'm
getting a
looking
chance. Like, oh my god,
like
like that's
I
just
know you
mind
guys,
blowing.
but we're gonna like when I sat with Sam and Chaz, and we sat down and looked at each other's faces, and I'm like, we're here as airsoft bros, and we're having a beer, and that was just so freaking cool because
Yeah,
Sam's a rocket scientist, Chaz is an audio engineer, I'm an electric truck technician. Like I never would have met these dudes, I never would have interacted with them, except we all love throwing little tiny white balls at each other.
yeah, legit. Well, Matt, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us about Ambition's Toll. I can't wait for the next one. And I mean, it might not be Star Wars. It might be Star Wars. I don't know, but I can't wait to talk to you again. It's just a pleasure to have you, man.
I'm really looking forward to the next time, Phil, whether it's the next game, whether it's the next podcast. Actually, every Wednesday, that's my favorite thing. Whether it's the next time talking to you guys, to you specifically, or you, the listeners out there, chase your airsoft dreams.
Yeah, man. Can't say it any better than that. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll talk to you next week. See ya.